Dear participants and colleagues, I will present now the PolyMotu concept and some other planting designs for both seed production and conservation of coconut varieties.
We will start by fighting about colors and coconuts. Then, I will present the PolyMotu concept, its Polynesian precursors, its present status, its benefits for conservation when compared to the classical fields gene banks, and the example of an attempt to implement the concept on a small island of Samoa, which did not succeed. I will finish by explaining how one could transform a plantation into a seed field which would produce both tall, dwarf and hybrid seeds.
Before we go any further, we must start by fighting about colors and coconuts. We need to agree on how we name the different colors of the coconut tree, and more specifically the colors of the young fruits, before they fade. In general, both scientists and farmers use color names that do not correspond to reality. Not only these denominations are false, but in addition scientists and farmers do not use the same ones. This can lead to great confusion. We will try to avoid it. Here is an overview of all the colors taken by the young fruits of the coconut tree. They vary from a very pale yellow, for a dwarf variety from Samoa, to various deep shades of reddish-brown and brown. They go through various shades of orange and green. Now, what are the color names used by farmers and scientists? In fact, what poses a problem is the red. Very often, farmers call red coconut palms with brown or reddish-brown nuts, which are not actually a true red color. For their part, scientists call coconut palms red dwarf, which, too, are not really of a true red color. Here are two charts that illustrate how red and its different shades are named, and how orange and its different shades are named. No true red color is found among the young fruits of the coconut palm. Some dwarf varieties produce nuts that are orange, or even slightly orange-red in color. We must therefore achieve that we use a common language. For the moment, I will keep the name red to designate these dwarfs.
In most of the devices that we are going to describe, there is an interest in simplifying the varietal landscape regarding the colors of the coconut palms. It is best to use a mixture only, on the one hand of a tall type coconut palms with green nuts, and on the other hand of the dwarf or dwarf compact types of coconut palms producing red or orange-red colored nuts. If these varieties are planted together, in isolation, and if seed nuts are collected, all the red germinating nuts will be dwarfs. All green sprouting nuts will be tall type, and all brown germinating nuts will be hybrids, dwarf by tall, or tall by dwarf. We can therefore produce three types of variety on the same plot. It should be noted that, according to the same principle, one could also create seed gardens by mixing, for example, a compact green dwarf with red dwarfs with thin trunks, or by mixing a green compact dwarf with a red compact dwarf. In this case, the hybrids produced would be of the dwarf by dwarf type.
In classical coconut ex situ gene banks, coconut cultivars are conserved as accessions, generally planted close together in the same fields. For reproducing accessions in ex situ gene banks, the technique of controlled pollination with bagging of the inflorescence is used. For coconuts, this technique is very costly. The lifespan of such accessions is only 25 to 30 years. After this period, most non-dwarf coconut varieties reach 15 meters high or more. At this stage, it becomes difficult to climb the palms. It is therefore necessary to rejuvenate the accessions before the inflorescences become inaccessible. In the Côte d'Ivoire African gene bank, workers use costly triple ladders that can reach a height of only 14 meters. In many other places, palms are climbed mainly manually, which is risky. Rejuvenation programs require climbing roughly 75 palms each about 15 to 20 times. Production of the 200 seed nuts requested for the duplication of only accession will demand 1.5 years preparation, and it will cost more than $1,600 in a context of low salaries in Africa. Only scientists with healthy research budgets can afford to order varieties from classical ex situ coconut gene banks. Almost all farmers cannot afford this.
Alternatively, the coconut palms could be planted in geographical and reproductive isolation, as it has been done by Polynesians and, more recently, by some Thai people. For instance, when a small, isolated island is planted with one variety only of coconut palm, breeding occurs only within this variety, and certified seed nuts are naturally produced for farmers. In this way, the constraints linked to the heights and ages of the palms are removed. Instead of climbing the palms for making controlled pollination, people only have to wait for the coconut to fall naturally to the ground. Open pollination will provide true-to-type and cheap seed nuts. Thus, the same accession can be kept as long as a sufficient number of palms remain alive in the field. In most cases, the duration of a coconut accession will then be extended to 75 to 100 years. Even if some of the palms die, there is no need to remove the remainder, as is done in a classical gene bank. Dead palms can be replaced by new ones, without removing the old palms remaining alive. Extending the lifespan of a coconut accession from 25 to 30 years to 75 to 100 years represents a huge saving of time, manpower and money.
In the 2000s, gentleman Philian Hoppenauer, from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Tonga, tell me about the traditional coconut variety called Niu Utingau, also known as sweet husk. The whole husk of the young fruit is sweet and can be chewed like sugarcane. Once the fruits are ripe, the husk fibers are white and particularly slender. This variety is difficult to reproduce. If you harvest the seed nuts in a garden, you often need to plant 10 or more to get only one coconut palm reproducing the sweet husk characteristic. The Niu Utingau coconut variety can be found in quantity only on the small coral islet of Onoiki in the Harpai group. Tongans are still sometimes taking seedlings from that islet, which is so small that it does not appear on most maps. If you take seed nuts from Onoiki Island, almost 100% of the resulting coconut palms will reproduce the true-to-type variety, reproducing the sweet husk characteristic. This was the beginning of PolyMotu, based on knowledge and practices of ancient Polynesians.
Respect for tradition can foster economic competitiveness. The amazing traditional variety Niu Afa, created by ancient Samoans for making ropes with the long and resistant coir fibers from the husk, produces the longest coconuts in the world. Nowadays Samoans are using much less coconut ropes than in the past. But the Niu Afa variety produces big coconut with sweet water to drink and tasty kernel, and can be used to make original handicrafts, very specific to Samoa. Until recently, Niu Afa was in danger of extinction. A project funded by the Global Crop Diversity Trust and led by the Secretariat of the South Pacific Community helped to multiply and conserve this variety. The plantation of 2 small islands with Niu Afa and 2 varieties of red dwarfs was initiated in 2012. Unfortunately, the old officer in charge of the project did not provide any monitoring of activities. He never returned to the villages and the islands. He even wrote false reports stating that he had been there, with photos dated several years before. Moreover, regarding the island of Nusafea, the clan leader had health problems and had to go abroad for treatment. Members of his clan then began to fight for land ownership on the island, and the plantations were abandoned.
Imagine that you have successfully planted a small island, not far from your home, by mixing 3 varieties of coconut palm. You have chosen to plant 2 red dwarfs, for example those from Tahiti in Malaysia, and a tall producing green fruits. All your coconut trees have started producing. You will therefore collect seed nuts and raise them to germinate in the nursery. They must be observed when they begin to sprout, and when the small germ that emerges from the husk does not exceed 5 centimeters. You know which are the mother trees of these seed nuts, because you know which coconut tree you harvested them from and, moreover, you can recognize them thanks to their shapes and sizes. Thanks to the color of the germ, you will also be able to know which variety is the father of these seeds. If the seeds have a red germ, they are red dwarfs or red dwarf crosses. If the seed has a green sprout, it is the green tall variety. And if these seed nuts have a brown sprout, there are hybrids, crosses between dwarfs and talls. So, from one place, you can produce and eventually sell 3 kinds of coconut varieties. This system will only work well if you plant red coconut palms, in fact the orange color of the dwarfs, and green coconut palms together, and there is no pollen from brown coconut palm contaminating it from the outside. This is why it is necessary to provide insulation around the place where you plant the red dwarfs. This insulation can be obtained either by planting the coconut trees on an island or in a small isolated valley, or by creating a sort of pollen barrier consisting of several rows of green coconut trees, or even by isolating the seed garden in the middle of a plantation of other crop trees, for example breadfruit trees, tamanu, medicinal trees or trees for wood production. If we had more time, I could tell you in detail about a mythical and very isolated volcano in Tonga, still recently active, and shaped like a coconut. According to Polynesian tradition, the largest coconuts in the Pacific were found there.
Or, I could tell you about the island of Rennell in Solomon, also very isolated and infested with poisonous snakes. It contains a lake listed as a World Heritage Site, in one of the largest raised atolls in the world, in which a famous variety has been selected, precious for the entire Pacific region.
Or, how brilliant Thai researchers used an island formed by the installation of a dam to plant a rare and precious variety, called Makapuno. For nearly 20 years, they transformed PolyMotu into a very profitable business, before the Thai administration compromised the project.
Or, how we tried to conserve amazing horned coconuts in a motu of the Tisharoa Atoll, with the resident biologist Nicholas Leclerc, and Tehotu, the son of the famous late actor Marlon Brando.
Or how we proposed to the University of the South Pacific to implement PolyMotu on its Suva campus in Fiji.
Now, I will explain how you can turn a plantation into a seed garden that will produce various varieties of coconut palms. The starting plantation must consist of a single good variety of tall-type coconut palm. In general, we will find, within this variety, coconut palms whose fruits are brown, brown-green, and green. In the middle of the plantation, choose an area of 50 to 500 coconut trees, surrounded by other coconut trees of the same variety. In this area, and around this area within a radius of 20 to 30 meters, start cutting all the coconut trees that do not produce green nuts. If some coconut trees with green fruits produce little or poor quality fruit, cut them too. Next step, plant red or orange dwarfs in the area you have chosen for the seed garden. Note that it is also possible to plant these dwarfs before cutting the tall brown or green-brown coconut trees, and to wait for the red dwarfs to grow, or even to produce, before cutting. But, in this case, the red dwarfs will put much more time to grow. Complete the planting by adding good green nut coconut trees of the same variety to the unplanted areas. To avoid the depressive effect of inbreeding, it is advisable, if possible, to seek these green germinating seeds in another plantation. Now your device is ready. As soon as the trees produce, you can use, or even sell, red dwarf, green tall, and brown hybrid seed nuts. But be careful, afterwards, avoid replanting brown coconut palms in or around the seed garden. This would compromise the device. So far, I must admit that, in the Pacific region, attempts to revive traditional coconut conservatoires, by using the PolyMotu concept, have not been successful. But think about it, if you have a small island near your village, or a very isolated valley in which the coconut trees could be placed in reproductive isolation, try applying the PolyMotu concept. This is a great way to produce certified seed nuts. In addition, It makes it possible to combine remunerative tourist activities. Tourists will be happy to discover traditional varieties and the small nursery that will be used to raise them. They will learn to recognize the varieties according to the color of the sprouting germ. They will appreciate to taste different types of drinking tender nuts.
Dear participants and colleagues, thank you for listening. We have also envisioned to install PolyMotu units in some oases of the Sultanate of Oman in desertic areas.